Imagine a dusty back road almost forgotten somewhere in the countryside of Ceará. The wind kicks up a thin layer of dirt. The sun hides behind heavy clouds, and an eerie silence settles over everything. You drive slowly, trying to understand why that stretch of road feels wrong. It's like the air gets heavier, like something is watching your every move. And then you see it in the distance. An old house swallowed by weeds, cracked walls, dark windows that look like hollow eyes. A chill runs down your spine. Could the stories about that place really be true? Is there actually a point on the map where tragedies keep repeating themselves for nearly 2 centuries? Where a mysterious man supposedly sealed his name in blood? Today, we're diving into one of the darkest legends in Brazilian folklore. Who was the enigmatic Labatut? A foreign officer tangled in power struggles, a vengeful spirit doomed to haunt the region, or just a ghost born from fear and midnight whispers? Whatever the answer is, one thing is for sure: no one drives past that place at night without feeling like they're being watched. To understand the legend of Labatut, we need to go back to the 19th century, a turbulent time in Brazil, marked by regional conflicts, political disputes, and the constant presence of foreign figures influencing the fate of entire provinces. Among these names, one stands out for the mystery he left behind: Pierre Francois Joseph Labatut, a French military officer who arrived in Brazil during the independence process. Ambitious, disciplined, and surrounded by controversy, Labatut quickly became an important player in decisive battles. But it was that very mix of courage and brutality that planted the seeds of what would one day become one of the darkest legends in the Northeast. The region where the story took root lies deep in the interior of Ceará, in places that feel frozen in time. Small towns surrounded by fields, dirt roads, and century-old houses create the perfect atmosphere for tales that blend into the very cultural fabric of the place. The older residents speak of strange events linked to Labatut's passage, their harsh decisions, severe punishments, and a commanding style that left deep scars. Over time, these memories blended with supernatural accounts, creating a landscape where reality and myth walk side by side. Popular culture in the Northeast has always placed great value on oral storytelling. On warm nights, when the wind cuts through the silence, families gather to recall old stories, passing down traditions filled with symbolism. The legend of Labatut fits perfectly into this context. It reflects not only the fear of the unknown, but also how the past can become something alive, almost tangible, when retold through generations. And it is exactly this thin line between history and the supernatural that makes Labatut such a fascinating figure. Because while documents show a strategic, determined military leader, the collective imagination transformed his name into a symbol of haunting, vengeance, and spiritual unrest. A man who, even after death, seems to have never truly rested. As the decades went by, the historical figure of Labatut began to fragment. To some, he was just a foreign officer trying to impose order in unfamiliar territory. To others, he was a tyrant who left a trail of suffering wherever he went. But for the people who live near the old military routes he once used, the story took a far darker turn. Locals say it all started with a series of strange events right after Labatut left the region. Farmers claimed their animals would vanish in the middle of the night without leaving a single drop of blood or even footprints behind. Entire households would wake to find objects out of place, as if someone had walked silently through their living room while they slept. And during certain times of the year, especially at the peak of the dry season, some families reported hearing heavy footsteps circling the house, followed by a deep, guttural grumble, something almost animal. The stories piled up over time. One cattle herder swore he saw, from a distance, the silhouette of a tall man riding a completely black horse, standing still on top of a dry dune, staring directly at him. The animal didn't breathe. The figure didn't move. And when the herder blinked, both had vanished. Another account tells of a group traveling at dusk who spotted a man wearing an old, torn, dust-covered uniform walking along the side of the road. When they slowed down to offer help, he simply dissolved into thin air right in front of them, leaving behind only a sharp smell of something burnt. But the most iconic episode involves an abandoned house in the area, known by locals as Labatut's house. People believe the officer used the place as a small improvised outpost during his time in Ceará. Over the years, the structure fell apart, but something in that place seems to have stayed. Anyone who dares to step inside says the atmosphere changes the moment they cross the doorway. The air turns colder, as if the blazing northeastern sun has no power in there. Objects on the floor look recently moved, as if someone still uses the space. And to many, the most disturbing sensation is feeling watched from behind the cracked walls. Some people report hearing sharp, dry creaks coming from the roof, like boots walking overhead. Others claim to hear commands shouted in a language that sounds like French, but distorted and raspy, as if spoken by someone who no longer breathes. The scariest story tells of a group of teenagers who decided to test their courage by entering the house shortly after midnight. They say they didn't last 10 minutes inside. The moment they started exploring the rooms, a door slammed behind them with brutal force, even though there wasn't a hint of wind. One of the boys said he saw a tall shadow move from one room to another. Another swore a cold voice whispered in his ear, "Go back." None of them could explain how the door opened on its own seconds later, giving them just enough time to run back to the road. To this day, they say they get chills whenever they remember the invisible eyes that seemed to follow them in the dark. The legend grew so much that, for many residents, Labatut stopped being just the name of a foreign officer. He became an unsettled spirit, doomed to wander the same paths he traveled in life. A man who refuses to be forgotten. A commander who, even dead, still patrols his old routes, as if trapped in a destiny he helped create. As time went on, many people believed the legend of Labatut would eventually fade away, that it would be swallowed by modern life, by new stories, or simply by the natural forgetting that happens with very old memories. But something strange happened. The more the region developed, the more roads were built. Bound houses appeared around the old paths where Labatut supposedly traveled. The more new reports started to surface. They weren't just stories told by grandparents anymore, or tales whispered on full moon nights. Now it was truck drivers, travelers, farm workers, and even tourists claiming they'd experienced things they simply couldn't explain. And all of these stories shared one thing. They always happened in the same stretches of road, at the same times, almost always right after sunset. One of the most well-known cases involved a bus driver who worked a route between two small towns in the countryside of Ceará. By an unusually quiet night, he said he saw, through a thin layer of fog forming over the asphalt, the silhouette of a man walking right down the middle of the road. Startled, he slowed down and prepared to swerve, but the figure just dissolved into thin air. The passengers confirmed they'd seen the same shadow. And even more unsettling, every single person said the temperature inside the bus suddenly dropped, as if a cold presence had just walked straight through the aisle. Another story came from a group of motorcyclists riding near the old Labatut house. They swear that even with their engines roaring, they clearly heard heavy footsteps keeping pace with them through the trees. When they turned their bikes off, the sound stopped instantly. But when one of them tried to record it on his phone, the device shut down by itself. According to him, it never turned back on. There are also people who claim to have seen a man in an old, dusty military uniform standing near farm fences, silently watching. His face, they say, always looks blurry, like he's surrounded by a fog that only he carries. And in every one of these encounters, the same detail appears. The figure never speaks, never signals, never gets closer. He just watches, waits, guards. These stories raise a question no one has been able to answer. Are we witnessing some sort of collective psychological phenomenon, a kind of echo, old stories told so many times that they've taken on a life of their own? Or is there really something trapped in that land, something that refuses to be forgotten? The line between logic and mystery gets thinner with each new report. And that's exactly what makes the legend of Labatut so powerful. Because when night falls over the Ceará and the wind sweeps across those empty roads, even the most skeptical people admit they feel something different, as if someone, somewhere, is still marching, still watching, still there. In the end, Labatut's legend remains exactly where it has always been, on the border between historical fact and the supernatural, between what can be proven and what can only be felt. The French officer's name appears in documents, maps, and official records. But the stories that grew after his passage through the northeast belong to another realm entirely. A realm shaped by fear, memory, and the human instinct to turn traumatic events into tales that survive for generations. It's strange how certain figures from the past become more than people. They turn into symbols, warnings, presences that seem to outlive time itself. For many in the countryside of Ceará, Labatut isn't just a soldier who lived almost 2 centuries ago. He's the echo of an era marked by violence, power struggles, and the constant fear of what might come next. And that echo, according to local tradition, still wanders through dirt roads, abandoned ruins, and silent fields at nightfall. Maybe all of these accounts are just stories, ways to explain the unexplainable, metaphors for authoritarian leadership, or ways to preserve the memory of a turbulent time. But there's also the possibility, however small, that something really did stay behind. An energy, a presence, a trace of someone who lived intensely and left without ever finding peace. And that brings us to the question that always hangs in the air whenever we talk about urban legends and supernatural tales. What matters more, finding out if it's real, or understanding why these stories stay alive long after everything else has faded? The legend of Labatut is more than a ghost story. It's a reminder that the past never really goes away. It lingers in the shadows, waiting to be remembered. And if you want to keep uncovering mysteries like this one, exploring strange places, and learning about stories that challenge logic, then this is the perfect moment. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, share it with someone who loves a good legend, and subscribe to Urban Secrets. It helps us a lot, and it motivates us to bring even more stories that leave behind that strange feeling, that lingering doubt that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. After all, who knows what legend is waiting for us in the next investigation?